Well, if we return to UK, one of the subjects that's been very, very emotive for a lot of people, an increasing number of people, is migration. And I'd just like to thank the team that sent me through information that enabled me to compile part of this news report. But let's have a look first of all at the Daily Mail that was, I think, running down anybody who was concerned. So notice how they play the headline: "Our sleepy village streets will be overrun with young men when luxury four-star spa becomes the second hotel to house hundreds of migrants near the town." So if you dare stand up and challenge it, you're just part of a sleepy little village. So two complexes. This is all in the Wigan area. But the top right hotel already dealing with migrants, but this amazing complex now about to join the fray. Now, what's interesting is local people are clearly on the case and are taking action. So this was sent through to me, and it's part of a post by Maureen O'Byrne, who's an independent councillor, and she's been speaking out on what's been happening. But it's a question that was asked: do councils get paid to take asylum seekers? And the background says in March 2022, the government announced its decision to move a full asylum dispersal model supported by grant funding. As part of this move, Wigan Council will receive £3,500 for every migrant that they take on board. So they should receive about £420,000. So you can see how effectively the government is bribing local authorities to accept the agenda. And here we've got more comment that the Premier, Ian Standish, has been approached and asked whether they would like to take any extra cleaning at Killy Court. This is the main centre that's going to be used for accommodation. They've been told the pay will be good, but they will have a security guard with them while working at all times, because the occupants are going to be all male, some ex-military and some with tags. What the hell is going on here? I'm contacting the council in Wigan today as well. But there was also some other comment which I found extremely interesting, because if we have a look at this, aside from saying that four-star village hotel changes use, it says that when villagers were made aware, it was already too late. And it also said that councillors, without informing or gaining soundings, sent a letter to the central government actually condemning the change of use. But what we can see is really that central government steamrollers the local authorities and certainly the population as a whole. In the Mail article, this was the final part of the final quote by the Home Office. Note it's anonymous. We don't have anybody taking responsibility for the statement. They said the Home Office has a statutory obligation to provide accommodation for asylum seekers who would otherwise be destitute while we consider their claim. So there's the emotional blackmail. But it goes on: the significant increase in illegal, unnecessary and dangerous channel crossings has put our asylum system under incredible strain and made it necessary to continue to use hotels to accommodate some asylum seekers. But of course, it isn't the number of channel crossings that's actually causing the pressure, it's deeper policy. Finally, they say this is why we will be using alternative accommodation options such as barges, which are more manageable for communities, as our European neighbours are doing. So essentially, the claim from the Home Office is it's nothing to do with us, it's policy and our hands are tied. How big is the problem? Well, surprisingly, the BBC was prepared to admit this, and they were pushing it out through BBC Global a couple of days ago, that migrant hotel costs rise to 8 million a day. If we do some sums on that, I think that works out at 2.92 billion a year. And that's just housing. That doesn't include benefits and other administrative costs as a result of the policies on the migrants. And the BBC article does manage to point at this, which is the Afghan citizens resettlement scheme. And it's said that on the government's website, it says that it's announced further details of that scheme. So I'm putting it here really so that people can go and have a look at this stuff themselves. But it says the scheme will prioritise those who have assisted the UK efforts in Afghanistan and stood up for values such as democracy, which we don't have in UK, women's rights, freedom of speech, which we don't have in UK, and rule of law, which we don't have in UK. And then it says vulnerable people, including women and girls at risk, and members of minority groups at risk, including ethnic and religious minorities, LGBT+. So these people can come and settle, 5,000 in the first year and up to 20,000 in the coming years. So this is nothing to do with boats. And it goes on to talk about the Afghan Relocations and Assistance Policy Scheme, which has already settled thousands of Afghans, and it goes on with a greater agenda. But if we think about what's happened to Afghanistan itself, it's been wrecked. We've got hundreds of thousands dead and maimed, and now the Afghani culture is going to be undermined by Western perversions. So where does this mess come from? Well, if we have a look at the Mail Online, this is going back to UK Column Report in 2021. We said that the Daily Mail was spinning the migration issue by simply trying to blame the French. And this, of course, is complete nonsense because, beg your pardon, something else is happening. If we have a look at a report again from the same day, the 1st of December, the UK column was pointing out that it was the United Nations that was talking about governments adopting a global migration pact to help prevent suffering and chaos, and yet the suffering and chaos is what we have. And this is the reality, that the pact itself is one of the main sources of the migration agenda. And how can we be sure about what's going on here? Well, here is Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the UN, saying he challenged the myth that developed countries no longer need migrant labour. It is clear that most need migrants across a broad spectrum of vital roles. So we can see who's pushing policy. And then if we have a look at Breitbart here, they were talking about the death of Peter Sutherland, and they entitled this "Mass Migration Advocate Dubbed the Father of Globalization." So here's a man who was working with the UN, the European Commission, and Goldman Sachs at one time. But what is his key quote? It's this: the European Union should be doing its best to undermine the sense of national homogeneity in Britain and Europe in order to pave the way for multicultural states. So the migrant problem is created in order to break down the nation state, and that is what we're seeing happening in UK, France, and other countries in the European zone. So we had this slide back in 2021, and essentially what we've said is that mass migration is to be encouraged and facilitated to break down the nation state, and there is simply no care about the misery of the migrants or the nations from where they've come, or the host nations, because this is globalist policy. But how does the government deal with this? Well, we pulled the not so pretty Patel out of the pile because, of course, she was back on the fact of let's blame the French. But this is nothing to do with the French. This is globalist policy, and it doesn't matter how many people die or suffer. The agenda is to destroy UK and other Western countries from the inside. So we would say, look past the migrants, because it's the policy that counts, and that policy is a globalist policy, and it is relatively easy to track down where it's come from.
And Vanessa, just before we come on to Syria, I mean, massive profits being made in trafficking people to pursue this policy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that we've talked about this many times, that trafficking, whether it's child trafficking, organ trafficking, trafficking for prostitution, those are the main harvests of war. And we're seeing it going on now, multiple reports coming out of Ukraine, both before 2014 and since 2014. So yes,